It's been a long time since we tackled a new episode of Enterprise, and Thursday's review of Shadows of Pajem probably makes clearer in part why that is. Berman and Braga have an intriguing, in a clinical sort of way, approach to two of their main characters, and ones that they have created and nurtured. Make them as unappealing as possible. I don't mean flawed, I mean they have a knack for making me loathe these people. Even when I should be on their side, they're just so insufferable, I'm tempted to completely rethink my positions. I've thought about switching to a hybrid or electric car even for my next vehicle. But a few minutes listening to these two condescend about fossil fuels, I'm ready to just go get a Humvee and drag a trailer full of dead weights around behind me just to make it worse. And speaking of dead weight, let's get to the episode. Carpenter Street gets its name because there are numerous references to the John Carpenter film Halloween, hence why this upstanding citizen is named Loomis. He gets a mysterious phone call about a deal that he's been making, and on the other side of that call we discover a Xindi reptilian. Carpenter Street is from Season 3 when the show tried to relaunch itself with this Xindi plot that, while a marked improvement, still had some really bad calls in there, of which this is one. After the jazzed up opening song that's still inferior to the Perfect Strangers mashup, I'm afraid, Loomis is out cruising for hookers, a completely natural scene because, as everybody knows, you work your best when you write what you know, right, Brandon? But he's not here for love, even the rented kind. He works at a blood bank, see, so he has access to information on people who come in.
Hey, I know you. From this morning. You brought me the apple juice.
Ah, yeah, blood donor. Wow. Apparently Detroit's the only place on Earth where a car accident can wind up giving you chlamydia. He chloroforms and then gives her a shot of sleepy time, then delivers her to the Xindi. He doesn't know that they're aliens, and probably wouldn't care if he did. Loomis is not the most conscientious citizen in the world. Leland Orser has a knack, though, for playing scum, yet being kind of likable despite that. I mean, this guy is completely loathsome, but it's Orser, so I have this unwanted inclination to cut the guy some slack. In the future, while Archer's busy feeding cheese to his dog, he gets a visit from Daniels, who is involved in that whole Temporal Cold War storyline that went nowhere. He's from the future and trying to deal with that whole mess. How to best sum him up?
I'm a tool. I'm a tool. I'm a tool, an unbelievably annoying tool.
Yeah, that works. Archer would like some advice on how to deal with this Xindi threat, but Daniels says that there's no historical record of a conflict between humans and Xindi. Although, again, it could just be that Archer was primarily involved and it was part of that overall effort to just kind of forget that he ever existed.
The events that are taking place are the result of temporal incursions. They are not supposed to be happening.
But they are happening.
Yes, they are, but the outcome hasn't reached us yet. It takes a while for changes to ripple through the timeline.
I'm calling bullshit on this one. This is completely at odds with what was shown in Shockwave, which involved Archer and Daniels and the two numbnuts who fucking wrote this episode. You could even have actually used those events. It would make so much sense after all. After last time's disaster, they're now working on ways to shield themselves from timeline alterations. But by now, they'd only had enough together to protect themselves, and they're unable to go anywhere themselves to get directly involved, or they risk being wiped from history. Hence why they're so desperate that they're hoping that Archer can travel through time and solve these problems using whatever resources that they can cobble together. All stuff that smooths over everything to justify Daniel's actions here. But no. Instead, the timeline has changed, it just hasn't reached them yet, despite it being months since the Xindi conflict started, and last time it was practically instantaneous. And it's not like I'm referring to the obscure name of some planet cooked up by a TNG writer who's dead. It was the season-ending cliffhanger cooked up by these two knuckleheads. And Daniels is going to want to send Archer through time instead of going himself because there's no time to get clearance to do this properly. Yeah, of course that makes sense. They'll be much more forgiving if Daniels sends some rank amateur back through time than to go himself, because anybody can be a time agent, right? And it'll be only Archer and one other person, not because they're scraping by unlimited resources, but because it'll be easier to keep their necessary saving of the entire Federation mission under wraps. You know, politics. That's what's real important when you're talking about preservation of 1,000 years of history, right? And it'll be sending them back to when the Xindi have nearly finished with their evil plot, not because their strained systems are barely able to make the trip back at all under these dire circumstances, but because Daniels is just real shitty at his job. It's no wonder the Temporal Cold War plot went nowhere when it can't even be given 2 minutes thought, even in episodes where it's involved. It's not surprising that one of the first things Manny Koto did when he took over was push the entire Temporal Cold War into the gutter and shoot it twice in the head.
The man the Suliban worked for.
What about him?
He's the one who told us about the weapon being built. Should I believe him?
You have no reason not to?
Oh, sure, why not? Except for the little fact that he's the enemy. You know, that sounds like it might be a reason he'd lie. So Archer goes to convince T'Pol to come along with him to Detroit, 2004, where the Xindi are plotting the destruction of the entire human race and naturally decide to start with Eminem. So they arrive in Detroit and begin one of several fish-out-of-water antics that, because T'Pol is lifeless and Archer is morose, are practically anti-jokes by the time they're finished. The pair steals the truck, and while Archer has no experience with the vehicle, his support for him driving it is that, well, he has a starship. Not that he used to have a hover car or anything like that. He has a starship. And the only jokes that are made about that is that he doesn't turn his lights on. Not that he doesn't know what the traffic rules are or anything like that, but anything more than that, they might break the atmosphere of these two being barely animate beings. You know, it's bad when the Vulcans in Carbon Creek were more engaging than our heroes. Eventually they track the Xindi to a factory or something, but they discover Loomis arriving with his latest victim, a guy on a wheelchair. But this time Loomis doesn't get paid. The Xindi in charge wants the last two by tomorrow, despite the word of these kidnappings getting out. The Xindi, by the way, is played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who, among many other roles, played the comedian in Watchmen, and who last year in an amusing Entertainment Weekly article titled, "Oh, that role." Well, this one was listed there not only as one he'd like to forget about, but that the experience of doing it was so terrible he nearly quit acting because of it. Enterprise, sapping both the audience and the performers of their will to live. Anyway, Archer and T'Pol follow Loomis back to his home sweet shithole, chase him down, and then try to get him to talk, but he refuses. And of course, Archer, our hero, figures he'll beat the information out of Loomis, which you might recall is what the evil Voyager crew in Living Witness were depicted as doing to show just how evil they were.
I didn't feel right doing that with you tied up.
So you're not a torturer, you're just no different than a mob thug trying to get somebody to pay up. Well, that's nice to know. I can't believe that Rick Berman, who was often the stickler on the show for staying true to Gene's vision, now has his name on the script for an episode where the captain of the Enterprise is beating the crap out of a weakling. Loomis is scum, but that doesn't mean that we want to see our alleged hero turned into a bully. And the best part is T'Pol's follow-up when Loomis spills his guts to avoid another beating from Archer.
In one individual, we've managed to find the worst qualities of this era. Greed, violence, moral corruption.
The only person this entire episode who has been violent is your captain. You cannot lecture about someone being a bad guy while doing things the bad guys do. Like I've said before, it's obvious Brandon Braga wanted to do 24-like shows. You look at this, you look at Threshold, the series, you see all kinds of evidence for that. But even after the Xindi incident, this is not 24 in space, and Archer is not Jack Bauer. Archer making tough decisions, even having to cross the line in moments of desperation, fine. But what you have done to him is just completely unbelievable. And what's amazing is this scene is just a nudge away from being genius. But instead it's awful. All we need is for T'Pol to take Archer aside and call him out on what he just did, to be his mirror. Show him, because of all the times he's done this in moments of desperation, because he had to. He's now comfortable doing it when he doesn't even need to. It's become something for his convenience, so that he'll have to yank himself back onto the right path and not let his fears turn him into a monster. But no. You know, what made Sisko and the Dominion War work was that it pushed him and his people to the brink, and sometimes they did things they shouldn't. But they were always called back from the edge. Even the darkest moment of that show was Sisko bearing his soul and then admitting that he was going to have to live with what he had done, being an accomplice to those horrible things. Turning Archer into a brutal thug without being called out on it by the highly logical and unemotional person standing next to him is just incompetence with a capital fail. Well, what Loomis has spilled is that the Xindi required knowing all 8 human blood types to make a pathogen work. Just go with it. Only AB positive and B negative are left to get, so Archer says he'll be one of the blood types to get dropped off. But first, time for some more wacky antics as they go through a drive-thru, and they beat the joke into the ground that you can make your meal even more unhealthy for just pocket change. Yeah, it's like Super Size Me, except the scene feels twice as long as that movie did. More T'Pol doesn't like meat antics follows until the comedy mercifully ends and we can get back to screwing up the drama instead. Archer's dropped off and T'Pol is left with Loomis, who lights up a cigarette, and T'Pol, naturally, is so aghast that she points a gun on him to make him put it out. Yes, she is clearly more worked up over secondhand smoke than beating somebody. How ironic that the whole crew will be put into jeopardy because she'll take the ore that could protect them and start using it to get high. While we've been beaten about the head and shoulders with T'Pol's latest moral crusade, Archer's gotten into position to spy on the Xindi and their bioweapon.
I don't know. I was thinking about trying to take out the bioreactor, but I could end up spreading whatever's in there across half the city.
Yeah, but it is Detroit, so it's unlikely anyone will notice. Needless to say, Fist's huge jaw manages to screw this up, killing one Xindi but letting the other two escape with the virus. A dangerous situation, so naturally he opens the door with the hand holding his gun rather than the one holding his communicator that he is not actually speaking into. T'Pol is ready to back him up, but Loomis warns the Xindi, which is bad, but he gets back the audience sympathy by trying to stab T'Pol. He gets knocked out and another Xindi killed, but the last one with the virus gets away. They chase him up onto the roof, where he's planning to spread it using a small exhaust fan. Sure, why not? I'll bet that'll work.
If he's trying to destroy humanity, he's not going to be able to do it with that. They only modified the virus for 6 blood types.
If they can infect 3/4 of Earth's population, it's unlikely humans would pose a threat to them in the future.
Okay, Archer's an idiot for not even thinking of that, but T'Pol, it's more like 93%, actually more than that. You know the history of human fossil fuel consumption off the top of your head, but not blood type statistics of people you go into combat zones with. But obviously we should expect the science officer to know more facts about history than science. Is that just because you couldn't find a way to use those facts to find something to bitch about? No, trick question. T'Pol could find a way to spin being O-positive into something people should feel bad about. Anyway, I can't think of any more reason not to continue with this episode, so let's get back to it. Basically, they kill the Xindi before he can succeed, and they bring him and all his crap back to the present. All the Xindi are dead there. So this is a clear victory for the crew, and Loomis is left for the cops when Archer leaves a tip about where the victims are at. A real bright day has now come over Detroit, as sure as the beautiful dawn image of its famous mountain ranges. Post-episode follow-up. Yes, once again annoying character goes to T'Pol, the person who seems to work every time I see her to make me hate her more. She seems to be a master of taking wry observation like Spock used to do, and instead acting like a disapproving nanny. Final score for Carpenter Street is 2 out of 10. Even compared to Assignment Earth, this one manages to be an even worse return to contemporary Earth story than any one we ever had. Everybody involved is just plain unlikable. The plot is stupid, and there's nothing but tired cliches throughout most of it. This episode is like getting your teeth done by somebody going through your eye sockets.
All hail the Overlord! All hail the Overlord!
You're not allowed to hit me.
Untie him again.
No.